Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Hunting Stories Podcast. Today we're going to hear some stories from a new friend of mine, John Ross. John and I met at Dan Staton's Elk Shape Camp in 2022, back in April. We were sitting next to each other, and the guys stood out as they kept referencing people who've done a lot of hunting, and he kept raising his hand. So that being said, we've shot our bows together, we've hung out a couple of times, and the dude is a dedicated hunter. So I'm not going to steal any thunder from his stories. I want to thank him very much for jumping on the podcast this week. Now, all that being said, let's go ahead and kick this thing off and let John tell you some of his stories. All right, John, welcome to the Hunting Stories Podcast. How you doing?
Good, Michael. How are you?
Man, I'm doing great. I'm so excited to talk to you. We hung out just the other week, and you said if anyone cancels on you, give you a call. And lo and behold, I have the next podcast canceled. So I'm glad you're available today because you were trying to tell me those stories, and I kept making you pause and say, "Wait, I want to get my true reaction on the actual podcast." So I'm super excited to hear the stories that you've been feeding me for the last week or so.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So let's kick this whole thing off with just a quick introduction. Tell the people about yourself.
Yes, so my name is John Ross. Just an average guy that is addicted to hunting and outdoors. And Michael, you and I met at Elk Shape Camp in Texas this
Yes,
last
sir.
year, which was a pretty awesome experience. I know it changed my outlook on things, it changed some things that I'm doing in my life, and I think yours as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, just a normal guy that likes to hunt.
How long you been hunting, John?
I started hunting probably around the age of 8, so 32 years, actually 33 years.
That's a good amount of time.
Yeah,
I know that when we were at Elk Shape Camp, at one point we were, was it skinning a nilgai? Is that right?
that's right.
And they were like, "We need someone who's got experience, someone who's cut up at least 200 animals." And you raised your hand, so you stood out for the crowd at Elk Shape as someone who's got a lot of experience hunting. So I'm sure you've got some good stories for us. You are based out of Texas and Wyoming. That's correct.
Yeah, so I live most of my time in Wyoming, and then we also have a place in Texas. We try to spend a little bit of time back and forth between both, but yeah, based out of Wyoming.
Awesome, man. Cool. Well, unless you have anything else you want to kind of share with the folks, why don't we set the stage for your first story? I've been waiting to hear it for a while now.
Sure. So, I come from a family that, fortunately for me, there's a long history of hunting in our family. Um, Not necessarily archery, but everybody hunted. So I introduced to hunting at a very early age, and like I said, I was probably around 8 when I first started going with my dad, and probably the first animals that I killed. I remember my cousins, spending time with them, shooting rabbits and squirrels with 22s or single shot 410s, running through the woods. This was back in the 80s when, it was okay for kids to run around with guns and people wouldn't freak out. And
Yeah.
so it was a good time. So, grew up in Texas, in East Texas, in the piney woods. So most of the hunting there is whitetail, unless you get into the small game like the rabbits and squirrels. And then the pigs is a big thing. We hunted pigs in Texas. So for the first several years, hunting, it was all rifle, gun hunting. And I think I was about 13 when I got my first bow for Christmas. So my first real bow, I had the little
Yeah.
toy bow with the suction
Suction
cups
cup.
and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yep.
So that was the same year that I shot my first whitetail buck solo. Um, and that's kind of a funny story. So, if you know much about hunting in Texas, it's a lot of sitting in blinds or tree stands, hunting over corn feeders. So I had my own feeder set up on this game trail where we knew that the deer were crossing, and it was a pretty cold morning for Texas. And I remember having my insulated coveralls on, and I had been sitting there for a while, and man, I had to pee really bad. So
Uh-oh.
I I leaned my gun up, in the blind, and opened the blind door. I'm taking a leak outside of the blind, and I look up, and there's a buck standing in the middle of the trail looking at me. So
Of course.
with the wrong gun in my hand, right?
Yeah.
So I reached over, grabbed the gun, pulled it up, and this buck is still just staring at me,
Oh
and
my
I
God.
shot it. So then I zipped my pants up and ran down and checked it out. It was my first buck. I was super excited. Um, so yeah, that was the first large game animal that I had killed.
That's pretty funny.
Um,
I've left my rifle away from myself, and of course that's exactly when the animals show up. That's a lesson I've taught myself, unfortunately.
I don't know if you read like Sports Afield and any of those hunting and magazines and articles and stuff, but there was always the cartoon of the guy peeing and the deer's running right in front of him, and so that was kind of funny that that's the way it happened for my first deer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got my first bow that year and really got into archery, um, and I started shooting almost every day. It was a Browning Fusion. So this is like archaic technology. It was a dual wheel bow. Um, I don't even think you could find one of those in a pawn shop today. It's that old.
Yeah.
Um,
Safe to assume you do not still have that bow.
no, I don't. I gave that bow to a kid several years later, a kid that was wanting to get into archery.
Yeah.
So I gave it to him. Um, but yeah, I got kind of deep into archery, made some longbows, had a bunch of recurves, just really got addicted to archery. And so the first animal that I killed with my bow, um, I was shooting the XX75 aluminum game hunter arrows and Spitfire 100s. And my sister and I, my little sister, we crawled up in this tree over a creek, and we knew pigs were coming into this creek, and we waited, and sure enough, this pig came out, and I drew back and shot this pig, and I immediately started squealing, was running around like crazy, didn't know what happened. And unfortunately, that was my lesson for mechanical broadheads.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so we never recovered the pig. The arrow came out, it did not penetrate very far. And when it came out, both of the blades had snapped off.
Ugh.
So that left a, a, a sad reminder in my mind to never use mechanical broadheads again. And I know that the technology has changed, and there's a lot of advances that have been made in material selection since then. But yeah, I was really sad that we couldn't recover it,
Mm.
but I was hooked, man. It
Yeah.
was like I just had to do it again. I had to try to shoot a deer with my bow. Um, and I started down like the path of becoming a legit bow hunter. Um, and see, I was 17 and I got a job for the summer as archery range director at a Boy Scout camp. So I was
Awesome.
teaching
Dream
archery,
job.
merit badge. Yeah, oh, it was great. Making arrows, making bows, and just had a really good time. And there was a guy that was also working at the Boy Scout camp that had he introduced me to duck hunting. And then I started down a very dark trail. I became a fanatic duck hunter. So my archery kind of became a way to kill deer and fill my tags for deer season before duck season started. And duck season in Texas opens the same day as rifle season for deer.
Okay.
So for probably the next decade, I started phasing out of archery hunting as much. It wasn't what I did every day, and I tend to when I get something that I'm passionate about, I I go all in, and so I went all into duck hunting, and for like I said, for the next decade, I bow hunted just for meat, fill the
Hmm.
freezer, shoot a deer before duck season started. And then, that went on for quite a while. And then I got to the point where I wanted to shoot. Actually, what happened was my dad had a deer lease in South Texas, and I started transitioning into hunting a particular buck instead of just waiting for something to walk by.
Yeah.
So I find, a trail with a scrape and rub line and try to, try to figure out what buck that is and spend time and really hone in on one animal. And so I had picked out this one really nice buck. And I was in college, and my brother called and says, "Hey, are you going to come hunting this weekend?" I said, "No, I have some stuff I had to do for school." And he said, "Well, do you mind if I hunt your area, your
Oh
blind?"
no. Oh
And I
no.
said, I said, "Yeah, no, that's fine. You can hunt it, but don't shoot that big buck." And he said, "Okay." Well, he shot the buck, right?
Of course she did. Of
Yeah,
course she did. Everybody saw that coming.
yeah. So this is huge buck, and it was his first deer, and
Oh, okay.
yeah, and it was a really good shot. I wasn't there to see it. My dad told me that it was pretty awesome. Um, so then I had to trump my brother. I had to kill a bigger buck than my brother. So the
how
next,
how many inches was his?
it
If
was
you had to
about,
guess.
it was like a 160.
Okay.
So I I spent the next several years passing on every buck I saw, waiting for a bigger buck. And I would draw back on a buck and no, I'm not going to shoot that one. I want a bigger one, and let off.
Yeah.
And so that went on for a while until I kind of got discouraged that, like I'm not going to be able to shoot a bigger buck. And and then life got in the way, had a career. So archery kind of got put on the back burner, and I still continued to duck hunt. Started guiding. We were hunting a lot in East Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and
Hmm.
down on the Texas coast. Um, and so I really didn't do a whole lot of archery hunting for, well, it's probably about 5 or 6 years that I didn't even pick up a bow and had kind of gotten out of it. Um, but I want to circle back to when I shot that pig the first time,
Hmm.
and I knew I wanted to hunt. There immediately there was a bucket list, and that was, this little kid growing up in East Texas. I want to go out west, and I want to shoot an elk with my bow. And so this is,
Probably before you climbed down from the tree, right?
yeah, probably so. Maybe even before I shot the pig, but it was. something that was in the back of my mind all the time. And it was something that I was really intimidated by. I didn't know anything about it. We don't have elk in outside of big game ranches in Texas. They're not running around free. So I just kind of kept pushing it off and pushing it off and pushing it off. So we can fast forward to, I have a wife and 2 kids. And, I think that once that happens, you start realizing that the clock is ticking. And I started thinking about, not bucket lists like I'm going to die and I have to check these things off, but man, these are things that I want to do. And that was always on the top, killing a nice bull elk with my bow. And work took me and my wife and my son out to Oregon. And I got to see elk in the wild. I got to go out and drive around and look for elk. And so, those guys in Oregon that I worked with, they told me, oh yeah, elk hunting is easy. All you do is drive around and you see an elk, and then you glass it up, and then you can, as long as you're off the road in the national forest, you can shoot it. And coming from Texas, where driving around in a truck and shooting animals will wind you up in jail, that sounded awesome to me. So we went driving around and looking for elk, and it just wasn't really, it wasn't the experience that I was looking for. Still had that itch. I got to kill an elk with my bow. So a couple of years ago, a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine that I work with, him and his brothers and his dad, they go every year. They archery hunt in Oregon. And so I was talking to him about it and said, hey, this is something that I really want to do. It's on my bucket list. And he said, well, why don't you go with us next year? So I thought, yeah, you know what? I'm going to do this. And I started doing some research online, how to get into shape for elk hunting, how to prepare for elk hunting.
Yeah.
And the first thing that popped up was this video of this guy named Cameron Hanes. So I started watching it, and I was like, oh my gosh, man, I got to start working. I got to start working out, get my cardio up.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way I'm going to get to the level of this guy, but I know I need to do something different. So, man, I started working out really hard. Started doing a lot of cardio, got my backpack loaded down, started shooting every day. And I thought, I think I can make this happen. Started doing all of the Elk 101, listening to the Elk Nut, trying to figure out, I didn't know how to call. I've never been able to use a diaphragm call like a turkey call. So I was listening to it just to listen to how the elk would naturally sound. Just trying to take in as much information as I could. And I thought, I'm ready. And so when I left Texas, I drove all the way from Texas to Oregon.
Oof.
And I went, actually, I take that back. That's not true. I drove to Wyoming and spent a couple of weeks with the family in Wyoming to acclimate, to get used to the higher elevation before I went and tried to chase these animals in the mountains.
At this point, did you already have the place in Wyoming, or you just
we owned property in Wyoming, but we didn't have the house yet. Yeah, so we rented a cabin, and then when my wife and kids left to leave me alone for September to go hunt, I camped out on our property, and I bought a diaphragm elk call, and when I drove from Wyoming to Oregon, I practiced this elk call. Yeah. And by the time I got there, I could I could keep it in my mouth without gagging.
That's a start.
So I I was able to do a very very crappy cow call, and so I decided when I got there, hey, this thing's really big, so I trimmed it, and it was a little bit easier. And I kept practicing it. I'd practice it kind of at night, but yeah, the first hunt in Oregon with my bow, um, we hunted for a couple of days. We'd go out, two each. We'd go set up in
Yep.
pairs. Man, we just weren't seeing any fresh sign. We weren't seeing any elk. So 4 days of this, covering 10, 12 miles and not seeing any sign, it was kind of discouraging. And
I've been there.
yeah, so, I had, air quotes, e-scouted the area. I didn't really know how to e-scout until, we were taught, at Elk Shape by Mark Levisay, like the real way to e-scout, which has totally changed everything for me. But I had picked out a couple of spots, like, okay, this saddle looks good, and here's a couple of benches and things that I had seen on YouTube and surfing the internet on where elk like to live, north facing
Yeah.
slope. So I had this one spot picked out, and I told my buddies about it. Hey, this is a spot we got to go check out. They're like, oh yeah, we've been up there before, and it's nasty and it's deadfall everywhere, and it's like pickup sticks.
Yep.
And
Sounds like elk habitat.
yeah, they're like, you can feel free to go up there, but it's rough. So I decided, we're gonna split up. I'm gonna go by myself, and I'm gonna go back to this spot. And so I hiked in, um, and it was really smoky. There was a lot of forest fires going on that year, and I got back up to the spot, and it was nasty. There
Yeah.
was deadfall everywhere. It took probably 30 minutes to an hour to go a couple hundred yards.
Ugh.
And
Like you're making my hips hurt.
yeah,
Walking over that deadfall.
yeah, it was tough. So I get up this little mountain, and I start seeing some fresh sign. I start seeing some droppings, and there's a couple of rakes, and man, hey, this is looking pretty good. So I keep, I pull out my phone, and I had downloaded Onyx, and I zoom in and I look. Okay, so there's a bench right up here, and I get a little bit further up, and I can see some ears. I can see some elk bedded down, and like not having ever done this before, knowing that they can wind you really easy, I decided that the best thing for me to do would be to back out and wait for them to get up from their bed and come down and try to get a drink of water and feed in this little meadow. So I did, and I got out, walked back down to the meadow, sat on the edge of the meadow, and man, probably 30 minutes after I sat down, I hear all of this commotion, this sticks breaking and snapping. And, I've heard people talk about how the elk make a lot of noise when they're coming through the woods. And so I get excited, right? Hey, these elk are coming. And I look up, and it's a herd of cattle.
Damn it.
So, I don't know if elk like cows. I don't know if cattle like elk. I don't know if they're going to scare them off. So I set my bow down by my pack, and I go out into the meadow and like herd all of these cows out and push them out of the meadow because I know there's elk up here. So I sit back down, and probably 15 to 20 minutes after I had got all the cows out of the meadow, it's probably around 5 o'clock in the
Mm-hmm.
in the evening, and I hear some more crashing, and I thought, oh man, there's more cows. This is not going to work. Like, I should probably just leave, go find another spot. Well, something made me stay. So I sat there, that gut feeling that you
Yeah.
get, like, hey, just stick it
That's
out. Yeah.
yeah, that's come up a couple times in some of these podcasts.
Yeah. So I sat there, and it was not cattle. It was cow, elk, and a spike. There was about 5 cows and a spike. So I thought, you know what? It's been 4 brutal long days of bow hiking, and I'm going to shoot this spike. And I go to draw back. I range it, go to draw back, and I get about halfway in my draw, and the lead cow busts me.
Oh.
And she's just standing there staring at me. And I think that I held my bow back for like an hour and a half in my head, which is probably like 10 seconds. But
Yeah.
so then there's a noise, another limb breaks from on the mountain coming down into this meadow. And they all turn around and look. And so I let my bow off. And I look through the trees, and I see these horns swaying left and right, weaving through the trees. And I mean, like, oh my God, it's a bull. It's a
Yeah.
big bull. And so the bull walks out, and he pushes all the cows and the spike back in the corner of this meadow. And they're behind the juniper tree that I'm sitting next to, so they can't see me. He's standing in the middle of this meadow, broadside. And it's like a picture, or like something you'd see on, National Geographic. It's not, this can't be happening. Right? It's too perfect. So I pull my rangefinder up, and I range him, and it's 50.0 yards. So I'm shooting a 5-pin fixed sight. Those color pattern that I've shot since I was probably 16 years old. I don't even have to think about which color 50 yards is. I draw back, I squeeze off, shot breaks. And when I was growing up whitetail hunting, when you shoot your bow, everything happens at warp speed.
Yeah.
If you want to see, did I make a good shot, you have to go back and watch a video, or somebody has to be recording it for you, or something. But when I let that arrow fly on that elk, the entire universe went into extreme slow motion.
Wow.
And I'm watching this arrow just kind of climbing very slowly. And this elk is looking at me. He kind of looked at me when I drew back. He caught some motion out the corner of his eye. And so he's looking, and I see him start to turn to head back towards the mountain. And I mean, like I said, everything's going in extreme slow motion.
Yeah.
And I'm in my head, I remember thinking, he's going to turn, and the arrow's not going to hit him. It's never going to get there. It's going too slow. And then I watched the arrow bury and go right in the vitals. And
Awesome.
blood sprays out, and he runs back towards the timber. And man, all of that training, all of the research, all of the preparation, everything that I had done, wanting to check this box my entire life, had just happened.
Yeah.
And I turn around, and there's nobody there to high five. There's nobody there. Nobody saw this happen. So, solo hunting is really cool. It's really rewarding, unless you want to share that experience with somebody. And
Yeah.
so I kind of sat there for a second and took it all in. And then I called my buddies on the two-way radio, and they came in. I told them where I was. They came hiking in. So I was sitting there for about 45 minutes, which is plenty enough time. I could have got on and checked it out before, but I didn't know. Everybody said just wait. So I waited. And to this point in the 4 days, we hadn't heard a bugle. There were no vocalizations at all. So we get up to the spot where he was standing, see good blood, and we walk up, and it's very, very thick timber. And they said, "Hey, we're gonna film like you walking in for the recovery." So we start rolling film, and immediately on the hill behind us and the hill next to us, bugle eruption. There's bugles everywhere. So we had to stop and wait. These guys have elk tags too, so they want to try to go shoot elk. So that plays out. Nobody else killed anything. It was getting close to dark, so we decided we'll go back and take care of my bull. So we walked in, and he had gone 30 yards, and it was piled up.
Wow, man.
So we cut him up, gutless method, took, every piece of meat that I could, took all the rib meat. I think I said this in Elk Shape when we were cleaning that nilgai that, in Texas, we call it fajitas. So
Yep.
cut off the fajitas and, took everything we could. And a big shout out and thanks to the Deary boys. We packed it out in one trip.
Wow.
With only one mistake. One of the guys, Ben, took the wrong trail, so he went an extra couple of miles that was unnecessary with no flashlight, and we wound up getting back to camp about 1:00 in the morning.
Jeez.
And, man, it was surreal. Like, I can still vividly see everything play out in my head exactly like it happened, like it just happened yesterday.
How many years ago was this? 3, 4?
This 3.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I thought at that point in my life that I had, been addicted to duck hunting. And man, that was nothing compared to what happened after I killed that bull. That's all I think about every day is elk hunting.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I was listening to podcasts. I was listening to Remy, Warren, and everybody that I could listen to learn stuff. And I think it was something that Remy said at the end of the year. He was doing, whoever it was doing this end of the year episode, and the question was how was your year? And like, some people would define it one way and some people would define it the other way, but people that hunted, they would say, oh man, it was great, I shot this animal and this animal. And so thinking about that, how was your year? So I got to check off a bucket list item that I had wanted since I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the pinnacle of my hunting career. But it wasn't.
Uh-oh.
So shortly after killing my elk, my son wants to go whitetail hunting.
Yeah. Is
So
this his first ever hunt?
First ever hunt.
Oh, that's awesome.
So the same year that I got to check off my bucket list item, another bucket list thing was if I ever had kids one day, to be able to hunt with my kids. So my son shot his first deer. the Thanksgiving week, and he got to shoot it with the same rifle that I shot my first deer with. That the rifle belonged to my dad.
Wow.
And he shot it in. This was back in East Texas. He shot it probably a quarter of a mile from the very spot that I shot my first deer. And this is part of a family farm. And my uncle was very particular about who killed deer in this one spot, the proverbial back pasture. So, in as far as I can remember, which I never got to shoot a deer back there. As far as I can remember, there's only been 7 people ever been allowed to kill deer in this pasture, and my son was the 7th one.
Wow.
So, and that wasn't the culmination of the year. That wasn't the best part of the year. It kept getting better. And so then we have a place where we can hunt Aoudad, Barbary sheep. And so a few weeks later, my son, who before shooting the whitetail had never fired a high-powered rifle. So he was shooting a 22 and BB gun and a 17 HMR, but he didn't know that recoil existed. He didn't flinch. He wasn't scared of pulling the trigger. So we go to West Texas and we're hunting Aoudad, and he makes about a 400-yard shot, and he kills an Aoudad, drops it in its tracks. So that, man, I was so proud that, I was able to pass this off. He got the bug. He wants to hunt. He wants to do everything, the same thing I want to do. He's ready to elk hunt. So,
wow. How old is he now, and how old was he then?
So he was 8, and he is 10 now. So he made a perfect shot. Super humble, very happy. I was very proud of him. So then I can reflect back on that question. How was your year? Was your year successful? My year absolutely was successful because I passed on hunting to my son.
Yeah.
So I think, when you asked me to share a story for the podcast, that I had to include that part of the story. And I hope that this story encourages people listening to take their kids, or even not their kids, their nieces or nephews, or take somebody young into the woods and introduce them to hunting, so that these things that we love to do, we can keep doing them for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. The timing on this story, John, is really amazing. So earlier today, I was playing around on Instagram, and Clint McInnes, who Clint, and he was on our podcast, episode 3, I think. But he posted something that was like, quit living your life so that your kids can live out their dreams. And it was, I'm paraphrasing, but it was basically show them that you're living out their dreams so that they grow up to live out theirs. And I'm like, that's really an amazing thought. I'd never really thought about it that way. And I messaged Clinton. I was like, that's something I want to talk to you about at some point, Ben. And it's amazing that you bring up this story where you showed your son, you're living out your dreams. You hit that bucket list item, and you've inspired him to maybe follow that same path and find his own dreams.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I plan to do the same thing with my daughter. She's been hunting with me already a couple of times. So I think she's going to be right behind him.
Yeah. And I've I don't know if you want to mention her cooking show or not, but I've gotten to watch that, and it's pretty great, man. I'm excited to see where she takes that. Her wild game cooking show on YouTube.
Yeah. So she just filmed another one that's we'll have to edit it and get it posted. But yeah, the Gianna cooking show is my 6-year-old daughter that when she gets this idea that she wants to film a show, then we'll film it. And she's done a couple of full-blown meals, but most, it started out with like pastries and cakes and stuff like that. But she's done some really cool ones, like the prime rib venison backstrap recipe from Remy Warren.
That's the one I watched most recently. Is great, man. And if you feel comfortable, I'll share the link to her YouTube channel in the show notes. If not, I totally understand. So I'll let you make that call.
Yeah, sure.
Cool, John. Well, that was a great story, man. And I'm so happy that you got that bull, and I could feel time slow down when you were telling the story. So it's pretty cool. Do you have any other stories for us, or is that the one you wanted to deliver today? And maybe, hopefully, this season, if you can heal quick enough, make some more stories for us.
Yeah. So, I think that's probably good for now.
Okay.
I have other stories, but yeah. So the latest story, I guess, is now that all we do is dream about elk hunting. We're a month out from season, and I had an accident this past weekend and busted several ribs. So I'm just praying that I'm healed so I can take part in archery season this year. Try to catch the rut before before it's too late, and then has to go into really hard elk hunting in the later season. But either way, I'm gonna take an elk this year.
Yeah,
broken ribs or not.
Well, you're invited to our hunting camp, like I mentioned earlier. If depending on how you feel, you can always come and do some glassing for us, and we'll do the hard work. Come back with some meat.
I appreciate it.
All right, John. Well, thank you for your story, man. I really do appreciate it. It was beautiful. Most people have some sort of Instagram or something that they want to maybe share with the folks. I know you're not big into social media, so if you don't have anything to share, then we'll just sign off. Or if you have something that you want to share with the people, let us know.
Yeah, so I'm trying to get more into Instagram. It's at John Ross 0619. I have yet to post anything, but I'm going to get around to it.
Maybe this conversation today will inspire you to go put the picture of that bull that you killed as your first picture.
Yeah, I can do that. And I'll probably load some pictures of my son's kills. And
there you go.
Yeah.
Perfect, John. All right, man. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us your story.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, of course, buddy. All right, folks, that's it. Another story in the books. I want to first off thank John very much for coming on the podcast. He actually was able to fill in when someone else canceled on me due to their internet being down. So John not only had a bunch of great stories for us, but was ready at the drop of a hat. So John, thank you again. Now, I hope you all enjoyed his stories as much as I did. I've put links to his Instagram as well as his daughter's YouTube in the show notes. I will say not much on his Instagram yet, but we're still getting on him to post more. I know he's out there right now in September hunting and getting it done. So hopefully he has some great photos for us. We've talked a couple times since recording this, and he's got a couple great stories already from this hunting season. So now that being said, guys, share the podcast with some friends. Let's grow this thing. Let's also tell some stories. If you have good stories, reach out to me. I've had a couple listeners do that already, and they're some of the best stories that we've heard so far. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. Thanks again to John for telling us your great stories. Now, everybody, let's go make some stories of our own.